Bienvenue à tout le monde. Juste pour votre information, cette session de Geneva Cities Hub sur l'eau et sur la conférence de l'eau de l'ONU sera interprétée en anglais et en français. Donc, pour ceux qui sont en ligne et veulent nous suivre en français, on vous en prie de choisir l'option d'interprétation français sur la plateforme Zoom et vous pouvez nous communiquer par le chat anglais et français. I and most of the panelists will speak in English. One panelist will speak in French, so please follow up on the interpretation. If you have questions, please write them in the chat and we will follow on. Before we start with the topic, let me start with one sad reminder of today. 1 year after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, we know that human suffering, massive displacement of people, destruction of civil infrastructure and damage of the natural environment will be felt for years to come. The UN and other humanitarian organizations have made great efforts in the war-torn country and beyond. Diplomats made political and symbolic steps in the UN General Assembly in New York, in the Human Rights Council, the Conference of Disarmament, and the UNEC in Geneva, just to name a few. And Geneva-based international organizations and NGOs have provided aid in the country and supported in different ways agreements between the parties in the conflict. These efforts offer some hope for the resolution of the armed conflict and for building a better future. With that, let me turn to our panelists and to our topic of the day. I am really pleased and we are honored to have a distinguished panel today. Johannes Kuhlmann is the Chief Scientific Advisor of the President of the General Assembly and Vice Chair of the UN Water. Mr. Graham Alabaster is head of the Geneva office of UN Habitat, also our co-organizer of this event. Diana Risolio is a coordinator from the Geneva Environment Network, a very dear friend and colleague of Geneva Cities Hub. Marie-Pierre Megang, head of the project for the UN 2023 Water Conference from the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. Marie-Pierre, bienvenue. And we hope we will have online Ms. Nathalie Olischlager-Jarsma. She is already online, so hi Nathalie. Program Director in the Ministry from the Netherlands, also on the UN 2023 Water Conference. It is really a distinguished panel of international organizations and member states. And I think it shows the importance of the topic because cities and urban areas are really very much exposed to water-related challenges, be it water shortages or floods, sanitation questions, urban health issues and others. And cities also can be part of the solution given their significant share of water consumption, of wastewater generation and so on. The UN 2023 Water Conference, or formerly known, I will try to read this long, the 2023 Conference for the Midterm Comprehensive Review of Implementation of the UN Decade for Action on Water and Sanitation, is a milestone event, especially seeing the slow development in the SDGs, be it SDG 6 on water or SDG 11, by the way, on cities and urban entities. That's why we thought it's very important to have this briefing with two purposes. One is to inform our participants. Most of them are local authority members or representatives, officials or mayors, for whom this issue is very important and whose involvement in the process we think it's key to be successful in the second half of the decade. Geneva Cities Hub advocates for the inclusion and participation of local and regional governments in the multilateral processes and we hope that their view and their role in the future might be reflected in the summary of the proceedings of the conference. But also, the other aim is to discuss more in general the questions concerning LRGs and their potential contribution to these multilateral processes. So without further ado, I would turn to our panelists and ask their opinion on the following questions. What do you see as the biggest challenge ahead of us in the area of water and sanitation? And what do you consider as the most important potential output of the midterm review in general and the water conference in particular? If I may ask you, Johannes, to start. Thank you very much.
Good. Wow, that's 3 questions in one, and I could talk probably an hour about all the 3 parts, but I'll try to summarize that briefly. So I think the biggest challenge is that, and I can give you a number that I think illustrates it well. We are trying to do good stuff, and I have assisted in a briefing last week in New York where people had calculated meticulously, and don't take the number now for granted, that's not the absolute number, but more or less governments invest $2.3 trillion a year into sustainable infrastructure to make our world more sustainable and lives better, and sanitation access and the human right to water and whatnot. But with the same investment, we destroy 1 trillion worth in ecosystem services. So with 2.3 trillion of well-meant investment, we're destroying 1 trillion in ecosystem services. Of course, we're helping people with the 2.3 trillion. That goes without saying, but at the same time, we are deteriorating the planet that we all depend on, and in the end, the ecosystem services that we need to survive with our actions. So the biggest problem is, how do we go away from this narrative, we need to do more, to the narrative, we need to do it smarter and better. We need to have really a way of how we can really assess, is the well-meant development that we're all wanting and striving for actually implemented, planned, implemented, and financed in a way that it makes sense in a holistic Earth system and nature approach. And I think we have these 3 dimensions of sustainable development: environment, the social dimension, and of course the economic and financial dimension. And we are way too often only really focusing on one of the 3 dimensions, which to me is fundamentally wrong. So I think that is one of the reasons why we are not making any real progress that is sustainable. We are making progress, but with making progress, we are harming ourselves at the same time, and that's not very smart. So if you cut your finger, you try to put a band-aid or stop the bleeding. You don't think to put a blood infusion into your shoulder to cater for the blood that goes out when you bleed, I think. And what do I expect from the midterm review and the water conference? I think it goes into the same lines. I think the midterm review, we know that already, will show that we're off track on SDG 6, a little worse or a little better here or there. And if you look at the VNR, the voluntary national reporting, that we get in the high-level political forum in New York, it looks pretty good country-wise. The countries report for themselves. We think, okay, we're more or less in a good shape. But if we look at the overall regional or global numbers, we know that we are not in a good shape. So there's a disparity between, say, a self-perception or a self-evaluation and the global picture that we have really through SDG monitoring. And we will have, I don't know, Andros, do you want me to already talk about what's going to come in the outcome of the conference, or is that
yes,
rather in a sec? Yeah, okay, so I'll take a couple more minutes here. we will have from the conference one mandated result, which is called, the conference itself has a terrible name. This is the typical UN bureaucracy talk that nobody understands. And so let's say it's the water conference. From the water conference, we will have one mandated outcome, one thing that the member states have decided, and it's called presidential summary, another terrible term. But really what we will do there is we will summarize the main findings, aspirations, and political messages that we get throughout the 3 days of the conference, and we will try to design or to propose some possible ways how we can follow up from the conference. Because the last time people met on water in the UN, not in different UN agencies, but as a whole, was in 1977. And if you read the outcome document, which was negotiated, there were a lot of good things in there. IWRM was in there, integrated water resource management, a lot of good stuff. But the problem was there was no follow-up process. There was nobody who dealt with it. They just had these good ideas. They threw it into the world. It's like throwing something over the fence into the forest and thinking, okay, somebody will pick it up and do good with it, which is normally not happening. So we need to find the right follow-up process of how we can deal with that. I think UN Water needs to play a role. There will be discussions in New York on something like a platform where UN members, UN organizations, private sector, and civil society can meet and discuss and maybe follow up on this conference. And there will be the Water Action Agenda, which is basically a huge bookshelf where everybody brings their commitment to and puts it on this bookshelf. And then we have at the moment, I think, around 100 commitments already. But these commitments are, what will I do? What will you do? What will you do? So it's kind of a motivation to do good stuff again. But what we really want to do in the conference is to find and converge on what is normally discussed as a game changer. So we want to make sure that while investing 2.3 trillion, if we need to double that in the future, we lose less than 1 trillion in ecosystem services. We want to change the way things are done. And some of these game changer ideas have been discussed in October in New York. There will be certainly something on the global water information cooperation. There will be something on early warning. There will be something on the new economy of water, on how we value water in a different way to not only pay for it as an economic good, but have also the societal and the environmental component to water evaluation and water pricing. There must be something on capacity development, and because we are talking here to cities, I think it would also be really important that cities, I know that the private sector will come with a big commitment, but there could also be really something from the cities, where the cities bring to the conference that 1 or 2 big transformational changes that they need to do. And I'm not a city expert, but of course there are concepts where you integrate microclimate management, water storage, and food production also in cities, and rethink that. And I live now in New York. I can only imagine how much effort it takes to restructure a completely unapt city for sustainable development into something that is sustainable. But I think it would be good that cities also come to the conference in the delegations, in the national delegations, or if they have side events or so, and really try to focus on what is the 1 or 2 really transformational aspects, those game changers that we need to rethink cities, not to make them more efficient only, but to rethink the concept of living together. That's almost philosophy, but I think that's what we need to make a change.
Thank you very much, Johannes. It might sound philosophical, but actually cities and local authorities has a lot of willingness to bring concrete solutions to the multilateral table. So I think there's a bridge to build here between the local actions and the philosophy. Let me turn to Nathalie Oischlager, who is with us as representative of the Netherlands. Netherlands being the co-host of the conference. We are really privileged to have you with us, Nathalie. Please, the floor is yours for the first round of comments.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. I would have loved to be in Geneva, of course, but I have to do it from The Hague. But great to see you. I was thinking where to start because, indeed, as Johannes also said, there's so much to say. But I will say something about why we co-host this conference. We are co-hosting this conference because we came to the conclusion that a lot of people don't really understand water, do not value it, and do not manage it well. So this was also said by Johannes, but that is really what we want this conference to change. And we need a change. Johannes just explained why we need a change. We need people to understand water better. It is a resource that we need for everything we do. We are water ourselves. We need it for our food. We need it for our economy. Water is at the heart of the planet. You know, the planet is blue, and we need it. And we don't realize that enough. There is this saying that we will only understand the worth of water once the well is dry, which in a lot of countries is already the case, and they do understand the value of water. So we really need to have a better understanding, and for that, of course, we need data. We really need to value it more, and for that, we have to look at the economic worth and the worth of water in our economies. And we really need to manage it better, and that we need to do collectively. We need to manage it better together, because you might think that water is only what you see, but there's a lot of water. It's in the air, it's in the ground. You need to bring it to the people. I don't have to tell you that if you are involved in how the city is run, you need to make sure that your people have water and sanitation as well. So this is really why we're doing it. We're having a wonderful, very, very special and very good working relationship with Tajikistan, because of course they already put water at the highest international level, which was really great that they did that. And we're learning a lot from them because they a mountainous area region with glaciers and have totally different challenges that we have in the Netherlands with a delta island states in the Caribbean. We do have a big event in New York, which is totally devoted to cities. They have been able to bring together some city networks. So I will send it to you, Andras, because it has just been made public last night, in European time last night. It was late in the afternoon in New York. But the Resilient Cities Network, the C40 Cities Network, maybe you are already connected, but they will have a big side event, and a lot of mayors are actually coming to New York. I think over 100, if I'm correct, which is really great, because as you all know, and there's a book written about it, if mayors could rule the world would be a totally better place, because usually a mayor of a city understands very well what you need to do. And this is really also what we want this conference to be. We need to know what to do. So the water action agenda, it's really about the action and about knowing what to do. Johannes said it right. There's a lot of money spent, but the question is it spent in the right way? And do we realize what we need to realize? And sometimes this really means that we have to be also self-critical. Even in the Netherlands and on our islands in the Caribbean, there are problems with the groundwater. There are problems with pollution. Everybody knows us because we're pumping our country dry with the windmills. We used to do that. So people know us because we're a delta and we have a flood protection. But actually, over the last summers, we had droughts and we really didn't know how to deal with it. And we have to learn from others. So really, I think there is no country in the world, there is no city in the world that doesn't face a challenge in water. And usually we face all three of them. We face the challenges of having either too much water, too little water, or dirty water. And this is the things that we have to deal with and that we have to invest in. And the good thing is you can invest in water. And the good thing is you can change the course, because we have a lot of water on our planet and we just need to use it better. So once we understand it better, we value it more, we invest in it, I think we can together manage it and we can really prevent a next crisis and even improve, get a better result in the current crisis, because also food security now is a crisis and you don't have any food if you don't have water. So that really is the aim. We need to shake up the world. We need to wake everybody up. And we hope that in March, we can all do that together. We hope that you will be following it. And the best thing is that when you wake up after the conference, you all start to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And I'm very happy that we can serve as a very up-to-date source of information for our partners all around the world, for example, about this decision of this event in New York. Water and sanitation and cities' role was mentioned by Natalie, and I think that's an issue where Graham can tell us during hours, if not days, but I will ask you to take the floor for a shorter time, and please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Andres, and hello to everyone who's listening in. I think, I say this often, but, we have to remind ourselves that by 2050, 70% of the world's population are going to live in an urban setting of some kind. And that's a very good reason why we need to understand water in urban agglomerations, water and sanitation in urban agglomerations better. Not only are we seeing this migration towards cities due to climate, conflict, and now things like COVID, we're going to find these situations changing the demographics so significantly that the old rules don't apply in terms of service provision. And we'll be continually fighting to keep up with this unrelenting pace of urbanisation if we don't change the way we look at urban and supplying people with services. And of course, for the global south, in those urban settings, within those urban settings, there are informal settlements. And this indeed, where you see the numbers of unserved, this is where the people are living. They're living in the informal settlements of cities. These are populations who are frequently below the radar because they're not included in any surveys of any type. So we have to ask the question, is the data that we're having on the levels of underserved accurate? And I would say probably not. We're probably underestimating those, particularly in cities. So we have to understand what those issues are, and a lot of them, as my previous colleagues have said, is about understanding this unique management opportunity that exists at the level of cities, where mayors and their staff can organise better all elements of the provision of water and sanitation services. So it's this that we really need at the top of our agenda if we're looking at specifically at cities. And that means understanding access. It means looking at how we be innovative with water resource provision. We've heard in many places that over-abstraction of groundwater has resulted in problems. We know that because of climate, that many areas that enjoyed surface water resources are no longer going to be able to benefit from that, including many countries in the European region. But of course, the other aspect is levels of pollution. And if we look at that, and UN Habitat, WHO and UNSD are responsible for monitoring this part of SDG 6, supporting member states to do that. No surprise that 80% of the waste, water and sanitation that's produced from these urban centres goes untreated. Of that waste, that attributed to industrial and hazardous sources, we only have information of 5% of what's produced. So there's a time bomb ticking with the pollution of our very limited water resources, which we also need to address. The issue of plastic pollution, we've heard from our colleagues at UNEP, of course, the impact that plastic pollution has had on the oceans. But where does plastic pollution come from? It gets into the oceans from being discarded in rivers and streams and sewers. So we have to understand sanitation in its entirety if we're also to address issues of environmental safety. But I think really, I mean, so that you know, defining what we're looking at in cities is very important. But I think if we look at how far we've come, I've been working on water for the past 30 odd years. And I mean, before the SDGs, we didn't have any means of management. On the MDGs, we only had figures which gave us access to facilities. That was it. We've come a long way having SDG 6 and having all aspects of the water cycle now monitored. So although it's been a challenge to help and support governments to monitor the situation that's happening, we're now getting much better data and information across the board for water sector monitoring. IWRM, water pollution, water resources, these are all now covered under SDG 6, which is very good. So it's not all bad. We've also heard there's been in many places, there's many good examples where people have developed alternative ways of extracting water, alternative ways of treating wastewater. There's an increasing use of nature-based solutions now, and looking at linking of management of wastewater, sanitation and drainage, which are of course very pertinent with climate, extreme climate emergencies. But so it's not all bad. So I think really coming now to the second question, Andras, I mean, what can we expect out of the conference? We would like, again, to use the conference as much as possible to highlight the issue of water, because there's still many sectors that don't understand the importance and the interdependencies of water to all of the other SDGs. It's not just selected ones, it's relevant to all of the SDGs. So we're hopeful that we can get, again, we can shine a spotlight on water at this very important conference. We can take the opportunity to learn more about these good practices. I was very delighted to hear from Natalie about the mayors who are going to be there in New York, because we at UN Habitat see them as a very essential missing middle to help improve the situation with water and sanitation. And I think really once we have this better knowledge and better understanding, then we can start to better understand the investments needed. And I fully agree with Johannes, that may mean rethinking some of the investments that are already there, but it will also mean an increase in investment, because water and sanitation as a sector is still very much underfunded. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Let me continue our line of speakers with the representative of France. Because the water conference will be an intergovernmental event, so it's very important that we have a representative of a member state. Marie-Pierre, thank you for coming from Paris to our event, and the floor is yours.
On passe donc au français. Il faut, je crois, que tout le monde active son petit bouton. D'abord, merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité et de me donner le plaisir de revenir à Genève, que j'ai quitté il n'y a pas si longtemps, par une belle journée de fin d'hiver ensoleillée. C'est parfait. Je ne voudrais pas répéter ce qui a été dit, mais et rappeler que je me place du point de vue effectivement d'un État et rebondir peut-être un peu sur ce que vous avez dit. Des défis majeurs, pour répondre à la première question, nous attendent à tous les niveaux, en fait, dans le domaine de l'eau et de l'assainissement, et ils vont bien au-delà de l'ODD 6 pour répondre à Graham. Et en fait, peut-être qu'il y a beaucoup d'eau et qu'il faut mieux la gérer, mais qu'il faut quand même considérer que d'abord le changement climatique, ensuite la perte de biodiversité, ensuite la pollution, nous mettent au niveau mondial et tous chacun dans notre pays, sur notre territoire, face à un dérèglement global du cycle de l'eau et partout. Et ça se traduit par, comme vous le savez tous, une augmentation et une intensification des phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes, donc plus de pluie et d'inondations violentes, plus de sécheresse, les deux bouts du cycle, et donc une disponibilité des ressources plus aléatoire parce que tout ça est beaucoup plus irrégulier, et une dégradation générale de la qualité de l'eau parce que nos pollutions et autres problèmes l'ont dégradée. Donc on est face tous à quelque chose d'important, et si on se place du point de vue de la France, par exemple, pays tempéré, développé du nord de l'Europe, là, on ne parle que de sécheresse, puisqu'il n'a pas plu depuis longtemps et que nos nappes ne se remplissent pas, etc. Et comme on voit, si on regarde l'année 2022 comme un flash, la France, comme d'autres Européens, face à des problèmes de sécheresse qu'elle n'a jamais connus, le Pakistan complètement noyé sous les eaux de l'autre côté du monde, il y a quelque chose qui ne va pas au niveau mondial, qui est complètement déréglé. Et pour nous, dans ces conditions, l'enjeu majeur de la conférence de New York, c'est de mettre la question de l'eau au cœur du multilatéralisme, parce qu'elle n'y est pas, et de la question de l'eau en grand. Et en fait, pour nous, l'eau doit devenir un sujet multilatéral par essence, comme l'océan est en train de le monter, mais peut-être plus encore, c'est-à-dire un sujet que dans toutes ses dimensions, en grand, seule une approche multilatérale, politique et entre États doit nous permettre de traiter pour tout à la fois éviter le rapport de force sur l'eau, et pas seulement dans le cadre des conflits, mais aussi dans le cadre des relations de voisinage et dans le cadre où le plus fort peut toujours évidemment avoir un rapport de force qui lui est plus favorable sur cette question, mais aussi dans le cadre des conflits, nous le savons tous, permettre de répartir les usages pour qu'on ait un usage au quotidien pour tous, c'est-à-dire régler les conflits entre les catégories d'usagers et d'usage de l'eau, et prévenir et gérer les crises de l'eau. Quand je dis prévenir, ça veut dire changer notre façon de gérer l'eau pour éviter qu'il y ait des crises de l'eau qui sont en train de se démultiplier à tous les niveaux et qui vont continuer à se multiplier. Quand je dis prévenir, ça veut pas seulement dire essayer d'avoir des meilleurs investissements ou des systèmes d'alerte performants, mais changer notre vision d'un aménagement de nos territoires par rapport à comment on vit avec l'eau, par exemple. Et puis, protéger un patrimoine commun au bénéfice de tous, parce qu'on a ça aussi dans l'eau. Et donc, vu de notre point de vue, il nous apparaît clair, mais pas encore partagé par tous, par exemple par tous les États du monde et même par tous les acteurs de l'eau, que toute gestion nationale et même régionale de la ressource en eau, qui est indispensable parce que l'eau, c'est autour de soi, doit aussi être considérée dans ses impacts au niveau mondial, parce qu'on transfère les pollutions, parce qu'on prend les ressources, parce qu'on doit avoir une logique de prévention des risques, et que si on n'a pas une vision globale et intégrée de l'eau au niveau mondial, au niveau multilatéral, on répondra aux défis mondiaux et on pourra s'approprier leur déclinaison sur tous les territoires dans toute leur diversité. Et aujourd'hui, force est de reconnaître que effectivement, ça fait presque 50 ans qu'on n'a pas eu de conférence des Nations Unies, des États intergouvernementales sur l'eau douce. Donc évidemment, on n'arrive pas à en avoir une vision cohérente du fait d'une gouvernance très morcelée, vous l'avez tous dit. Il y a quand même, alors j'ai essayé de trouver le bon chiffre pour convaincre mon ministre de venir, et on ne sait pas si c'est 28 ou 35 organisations qui sont sous UN Water. Donc pour vous dire, voilà. Comme vous le savez, elles sont de nature très différentes parce que cohabitent des grosses organisations onusiennes qui ont leurs enjeux politiques qui sont les leurs, la FAO, le PUE, l'OMS, etc. Et puis des agences d'exécution qui donc elles font des projets, et puis aussi des banques de développement qui elles font du financement. Tout ce petit monde, je dirais, disparate, avec un secrétariat qui n'est qu'un mécanisme de coordination finalement, donc qui n'a rien de politique au niveau du multilatéral. C'est sûr qu'on ne va pas avancer vers un multilatéralisme de l'eau pour ça. Donc pour nous, la conférence, c'est un enjeu majeur pour mobiliser tous les États C'est une opportunité pour la communauté internationale de lancer, de mettre l'eau au cœur du multilatéralisme avec une gouvernance adaptée. Je répondrai à la question 2 quand tu la poseras sur qu'est-ce que ça pourrait être. Et de penser l'eau en grand dans toutes ses dimensions. Et pour venir à notre auditoire, et vous le savez, c'est l'enjeu de la conférence de New York aussi, un multilatéralisme inclusif, ça fait longtemps que la France le défend, avec aussi les villes, avec aussi tous les groupes, et qui permettent à ces différents groupes d'acteurs au niveau local de dialoguer avec les États et avec le système multilatéral, parce que c'est une question globale. Et on verra comment on fait peut-être à ta deuxième question, mais la délégation française dans cet esprit, et on espère que ça va marcher, est elle-même inclusive avec une forte représentation politique dont on espère qu'elle sera maintenue parce qu'on veut c'est ce multilatéralisme entre États à New York et un signal fort. Et comment ça va se faire, et aussi une représentation très inclusive parce que nous avons dans notre délégation non étatique aussi bien des parlementaires que des maires de grandes villes. Vous savez sans doute que la ville de Paris, la maire de Paris interviendra dans un événement sur les villes. Nous avons aussi des représentants de certaines de nos collectivités territoriales, notamment nous avons le président de la collectivité territoriale de Guyane, parce que nous aussi, nous avons des problèmes d'eau transfrontaliers très compliqués avec le fleuve Maroni, et donc nous sommes très heureux d'avoir aussi des représentants de cette partie de nos territoires, et plus nos représentants d'agences de l'eau, parce que nous essayons, nous, de décliner au niveau de notre territoire une gestion intégrée de l'eau à tous les niveaux et pour tous les acteurs. Et enfin, des représentants de nos grandes entreprises, parce que vous savez qu'en France, nous avons quand même des grandes entreprises multinationales qui s'occupent d'eau. Donc, on essaye d'avoir cette approche-là. Elle sera dans notre délégation. Et pour nous, France et disons État français, pour nous, c'est bien mettre l'eau au cœur du multilatéralisme qui devrait être le premier résultat de cette conférence. Et après, on peut discuter comment. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Pierre. En effet, ta dernière remarque me conduit à ma deuxième round de questions. So, if I can continue on that, I would like to ask you, Diana, first to finish this first round before we continue with the question of Marie-Pierre. So, what do you see as challenges? What do you see as potential outcomes? The floor is yours.
And I will continue in English. Indeed, you have reminded us that the UN Water Conference is a milestone that is, and what's important to insist here is that it's, because we are in Geneva, is that it's very relevant to a lot of processes ongoing in Geneva. Also related to what Marie-Pierre just said. So in Geneva, and I'm looking here because in the room we have also various actors who work on water issues from Geneva. In Geneva, water is discussed in various fora, being it human rights, humanitarian, health, meteorology, disaster prevention. I'm reading to not forget some of them, nature conservation, economy, peace, pollution, and others. And numerous organizations, UN institutions, you have mentioned various of these actors, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, business organizations, academic institutions, and the Geneva Cities Hub trying to bring the voice of local authorities into these discussions are based here. And it's in this context also that even a Geneva Water Hub was launched here in 2014 that is more focused on peace, but the initial ideas were also to start looking at other topics that are relevant and that I have just mentioned. So there, we are here in a region that is really a strategic hub for global water governance. And actors such as the Geneva Cities Hub can make this bridge in between what the role of cities, because we have also understood from what Graham has explained us how water is relevant for the local level. Also related to the role that Geneva can play, I would like to mention that the co-hosts of the conference, both the Netherlands and Tajikistan in Geneva, have been discussing water in various multilateral forums. I think the latest discussion was, for example, at the World Trade Organization, trying to really bring there some inputs for what's going to happen in New York next month. Marie-Pierre has mentioned the triple planetary crisis, so climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and its impact on the water cycle. And all the examples she mentioned are relevant to the multilateral processes that are ongoing in Geneva. And as she mentioned also, it's really, there is also a place for local governance in those processes. I personally started my career many years ago working for a government in the Ministry of Environment focusing on water. At the international level, I also continued working on water, and when I was a member of the parliament of the city of Geneva, I also had the occasion to propose various resolutions on the access to water. I have seen how this sector has evolved, and and as you have mentioned, in terms of how the progress that has been done since the last water conference, the fact that there was no real follow-up process, even though there have been some interesting developments and new stakeholders that have been placed around the table. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen in New York, because it certainly will have an impact on what's ongoing in international Geneva. Last point I wanted to mention here, because you mentioned the commitments that are available, so the Water Action Agenda commitments, you are the one who mentioned it, Johannes. I personally visited the website where you have the commitments listed on the UN, so the United Nations website, and I only found one by local authorities. So for the local authorities who are with us, I think maybe the link can be shared on the chat. There is room there to bring your voice and what you are expecting, what are the messages you want to convey. So there's still room, because one is certainly not enough.
Thank you very much, Diana. In the meantime, there are several interesting questions on the chat, so I would like to split the second round of questions, if you don't mind, and perhaps target first Johannes and Natalie with a follow-up question on inclusivity. Because you are the closest to the organization of the conference. I know that it is supposed to be an inclusive multilateral process. Could you elaborate on that, how you see the involvement of different international organizations, how you see the collaboration in New York during the conference between the UN, its member states, and perhaps cities, as we heard, and do you see any room for cities and local authorities to influence the negotiations or the discussions of the outcome documents? Johannes, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think Natalie will be the better suited person to really answer this question, but I think, I mean, inclusivity is one of the three slogans of the conference, so it's clear that we want to really make sure that we don't have only UN water people or government water people talking to each other. But also, this is like it's like an Auriga stable. I don't know if that is used in English, that term, when the hero has to empty the stable, has to shovel all the dung out of the stable. It's really difficult. So, we are living in a pretty bureaucratic UN system, where the conference will be a conference where member states and UN organizations will be prioritized, and then also civil society and private sector will be heard. So The conference itself is, for me, an attempt to be inclusive. What will help a lot is that we will have the New York Water Week. So we start before the conference already with events in New York where really the focus is on civil society and on the private sector. And then how do we make really the link between all those hundreds of events that are planned at the moment and the conference outcome, that political document that we need to do? I think that will be possible if people join both the Water Week and the conference, and through the interactive dialogues, the 5 thematic dialogues that we will have from the 22nd to the 24th, integrate some of these aspects into those transformational ideas that we can summarize in the outcome. So the process for being inclusive is really go through the Water Week into the conference and make sure that we have as vast as possible spectrum of actors referenced and mentioned in the outcome document, which the president of the UNGA that I work for has asked me no more than 7 pages. So that's the balance that we have to strike between something that people want to read and something that is completely inclusive and mentioning everybody with their name. Also, the conference is a starting point, because what it's really all about is the process that starts from this conference. We need commitments in this conference on the game changers, on transforming our business. I want to repeat that just doing more in the same way will not help. If I think Henk Oving from the Netherlands, the special envoy, mentioned in the COP, I know we need sanitation. It's horrible that we have all this uncleared water released in the oceans, but if with our current technology we just provide sanitation to everybody, we also raise our CO2 emissions by whatever 10% or so. So that's not what we want. So the process starts at the conference, and I think it's clear that governments alone cannot save this world. We need a coalition between cities, private sector, civil society, and administrations to follow up from this conference. So really the most important thing for me is that cities, mayors, other people come to New York, they discuss with everybody, and we agree on this political platform, or this platform that Marie-Pierre has alluded to be open for everybody. Because that's normally not the case. UN Water, yes, we have partners, but not everybody can just participate, or in most UN processes, civil society is seen as we can discuss with you, but you're not on the decision table. And we need to change the culture of that in terms of implementing what's decided in an intergovernmental process, and to make sure that follow-up process is one that is carried and owned by civil society, science, business, and so on.
Thank you very much. Natalie, would you add your co-organizer point of view?
Thank you so much. Yes, well, indeed, Johannes already alluded to some of the things, which are, of course, all true. The 3 main principles for us, for Tajikistan and us, when we started to think about this conference and how we wanted to do that, was that we wanted to be inclusive, that it had to be cross-sectoral, and that it needed to be action-oriented. And I'll quickly say something about the other 2 as well, because Johannes also said some important things about that. Cross-sectoral, because we do have a lot of water conferences, but it's always the water people talking to the water people. It's a bubble, so to speak. So we need people that know about food, that know about textile, that know about production, that know about health, that know about how to run a city. We need those people to talk about water. So it needed to be cross-sectoral. And as I already explained, it needed to be action-oriented. And therefore, we have the water action agenda. By being cross-sectoral, you also become more diverse. But as Johannes said, water is something that all of us need, everybody in the world. How do you give everybody in the world a voice in the UN? That is very complicated. So we have different ways of how we went about this. we started mapping all kind of different networks that had never been at a UN conference before, but that we knew from the water world or that we knew from the food world. And by mapping these networks, we were able to make them aware about the water conference that is going to happen in March. And so, long story short, we have 1,168 newly accredited organizations this time in a UN conference, which is a record. So we're quite happy that we were able, I mean, it's not everybody, not giving everybody a voice, because then you would have billions of newly accredited people, but to have 1,168 newly accredited organizations, that's really a big thing. And I think we were really able that way to give more people a voice than ever before. It is true that UN conferences are nation-led. The nations are the member states of the UN. But I think by building the coalitions, as Johannes mentioned, coalitions between the governments, the indigenous people, the knowledge institutes, the women, the cities, and everything and everybody, if we build that kind of coalitions and address the issues at hand, we might come up with newer ways of how to approach it, because we really need to change the way we work. And indeed, we have created this mess together. Not only governments are to blame for a water crisis or an energy crisis or whatever. We have done it together, so we have to also make the solutions together. And therefore, it's also very important that we have private sector there. So apart from the big event that I just told you about, which I know about now, the cities, there's also going to be some really big events where private sector is involved, because we definitely need them. And then, as Johannes said, and I just want to reiterate, parallel to the conference, where we try to bring as many voices as we can and as many perspectives as we can, parallel, we have the New York Water Week, which also makes it possible to have some side events which are a little bit more out of the box than the UN rules normally allow for. So that's also going to be very interesting, because people can go back and forth and can learn in these different events. Johannes mentioned that we are about 90 or 100 commitments now in the Water Action Agenda. We know that there are some really bolder ones and more ambitious ones coming up. But hopefully at the conference, there will still be even more ambitious commitments that are going to be made. And when we have those side events where private sector and indigenous and everybody, forms a coalition and addresses these issues at hand together, maybe even more bold commitments can come. So you don't hear me say game changer, because that's a word that I leave for Johannes. But the thing is, of course, we want to look back on the conference and think that this was indeed the conference that changed the game. It's a little bit hard to say upfront which one will be changing the game, but I think the word game changer is important, because it shows that we're very ambitious to make the change and to start a change. And hopefully when we look back, we can be proud of ourselves and say that this was the start of the change that needed to be made. So with this, I also have to say goodbye, because I have to go into another meeting at 2. So I hope, Andras, it's okay for you that I wave at everybody and wish you a lot of success in all your work. And please keep it going and think about water in everything you do.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you for your presence, your contribution, and also on our side, good luck with all the organizations and all the best success in your new endeavor and for the water conference. So thanks again for joining us.
Köszönöm. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me reshuffle a little bit the topic to the question of regulations and relationship between the international and the national level. Several questions in the chat pointed out that most of the water issues, be it rainwater collection, wastewater management, water infrastructure development are usually national competencies, so national regulations. How do you see, Graham, what the UN can do at its best to influence member states to go to the right direction and to help, of course, local and regional governments to profit from it?
Okay, that's a rather large question, but I'll try and start to answer bits of it. I mean, although with regard to water, there's national standards in most countries, the issue, of course, is the enforcement of regulations, which is very, very difficult when you trickle down to the local level. So, although the regulations are in place, at national level, quite often there's very little capacity to monitor the situation. And as you go down, generally down towards the lower levels, to regional areas, to districts, and of course to cities and local authorities, the capacity is even weaker to monitor. So much of the issues related to access to water, for example, or discharge of wastewater and excreta go effectively unmonitored. The system that we have in place at the moment, managed by UNICEF and WHO, the Joint Monitoring Programme, is focused really on access to facilities. It doesn't talk, it doesn't go down to the very local level. And of course, the disadvantaged communities that I mentioned, not just those in rural areas, but those also in low-income areas of cities, are the ones where we don't have any data at all. So, and they fall outside of regulation, because how do you regulate somebody who lives in an informal settlement and they don't even have a decent house to live in? It becomes a bit impractical to look at the quality of their water that they get when they basically have to get their water from usually an in-situ source. So it's a very complex picture. It does need, of course, standardization at national level. In the countries where water is extremely scarce, they do have better standards. If you go to a country like Jordan, they have much, where water, of course, is very scarce. 95% of the water in Jordan is reused because it's so scarce, and they have very good regulations and standards about what that water is used for. In other areas, in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where the situation is extremely bad, there's very little data available. There's very little data. I mean, that's some work we did probably 10, 15 years ago, where I compared the national figures with what was actually happening in the low-income areas. We found that where a national figure reflected 80% coverage, the reality on the ground was 10%. And I think that probably hasn't changed much since then. So yes, regulation is important. It's important that you do have standards in place, but the trickle down and the implementation is the biggest challenge.
Thank you very much, Graham. I would like to turn to Marie-Pierre and to Diana with a question which was also raised in the chat about how to make multilateralism of water governance more efficient. And I would love to hear your 2 points of view from a national point of view and more from an international organization point of view, how you see collaboration or the cooperation between the different organizations, as well as between the national and the international level, how to make it more efficient water issues. Let's start.
There's a lot ongoing at the international level. I think not all the examples were mentioned, but what was mentioned is the lack of in the UN itself, and there you were referring maybe more to the General Assembly, the lack of presence of some actors. But actually there are a lot of water processes, and there are annual meetings where in Stockholm, where all the stakeholders working on water issues have the possibility to work and to engage. But I would let Marie-Pierre say how things can be improved.
Moi, je crois, Je voudrais juste retourner la question que Andreas a posée à Graham quand il lui demandait comment est-ce que UN Habitat, en tant qu'organisation internationale onusienne, peut influencer les États pour aller dans la bonne direction en termes de recommandations. Nous, on se demande plutôt, les États, comment est-ce qu'on peut influencer le système multilatéral pour qu'il soit comme on voudrait qu'il soit. Donc, ça marche un peu dans les deux sens. Et c'est un peu la réponse à cette question. C'est-à-dire que, d'abord, cette conférence, effectivement, c'est une opportunité, un point de départ, une opportunité pour nous de nous mettre dans la bonne direction dans le système multilatéral. Et ça, je crois que c'est important qu'on imagine un suivi qui fait qu'elle ne restera pas lettre morte d'une grande organisation, voilà. Et pour reprendre ce que je disais, je pense que la prise de conscience que l'eau, la question de l'eau, encore une fois, dans toutes ses dimensions, comme bien commun mondial, est une question pour le multilatéralisme. Ça, à mon avis, c'est quelque chose de très important. Et c'est pas partagé par tous les États. Donc déjà, parce que le multilatéralisme onusien entre États, moi j'espère qu'il y aura le maximum d'États représentés et actifs dans cette conférence, parce que c'est là qu'on va articuler une vision multilatérale et mondiale de la ressource en eau. Moi, je trouve ça très intéressant que l'OCDE, qui va être très présent parce qu'il a fait beaucoup de travaux sur la ressource en eau, va présenter ses travaux qui s'appellent la ressource hydrique bien commun de l'humanité, l'OCDE. Donc, voilà, tout ça, c'est nouveau. Parce que, comme l'a dit Graham très bien, de toute façon, les États qui avaient beaucoup d'eau se sont pas trop... donc là, par exemple, un État comme la France prend en boomerang le fait que, effectivement, l'eau est rare et il va falloir faire quelque chose. Et les États comme la Jordanie ou d'autres d'ailleurs, qui sont des États, voilà, ont une gouvernance de leur gestion de l'eau qui est tout à fait exceptionnelle. Donc, voilà, qu'on en prenne conscience que c'est un problème mondial et qu'on en ait une vision. Après, l'articulation, pour moi, elle est tout à fait réelle. C'est-à-dire que une vision intégrée et globale au niveau multilatéral, entre États et avec tous les acteurs, ça se décline après et ça garantit une cohésion et aussi une cohésion sociale, parce que un des problèmes majeurs quand même, c'est que comme on n'a pas de vision intégrée, comme on n'a pas la pensée de l'eau, voilà, même UN Water, on a des conflits d'usage qu'on ne sait pas résoudre et on a, et ça se voit bien dans les dialogues interactifs, je les ai pas, enfin, mais je prends juste un tout petit exemple pour faire comprendre ce que je veux dire. Dans le premier dialogue interactif qui s'appelle Eau et santé, alors qu'il devrait s'appeler Eau et droit fondamental à l'eau et à un assainissement, comment le garantir? Déjà le titre, voilà. On nous parle d'améliorer les systèmes d'eau et d'assainissement, ok. On ne nous parle jamais d'un système de gestion intégrée de l'eau qui intègre l'eau et l'assainissement, les systèmes agricoles, la transformation du modèle. C'est ça qu'on veut. Et c'est ça dont on a besoin et c'est ça qui va entre tous les acteurs avec une vision politique penser la question de l'eau. Donc moi je pense que au niveau multilatéral, les États, parce que c'est bien eux le cœur du système multilatéral et que voilà à l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies, mais aussi au Conseil de sécurité, etc. Voilà, comme vous le savez, voilà, les États doivent penser l'eau comme bien commun mondial et après ça se déclinera dans cette vision avec des normes qui peuvent être mondiales et qui peuvent être déclinées. Voilà. Et à mon avis, le cœur du problème, bien sûr, c'est l'innovation, mais c'est pas ça qui nous sauvera. C'est trouver un système de gouvernance. Et l'eau, ça se gère en proximité. Tout le monde dit ça, tout le monde est d'accord, mais qui soit articulé avec cette vision mondiale et qui puisse se décliner en proximité. Et je pense qu'il y a une gamme en fonction de la nature des États, de la nature de leurs institutions, de leurs ressources en eau, de ce qu'ils font, etc. Une gamme de choses qui, dans une série de règles communes qu'on aurait, et qui sont encore une fois politiques, pensées au niveau multilatéral, peuvent se décliner. Par rapport à ça, si je prends la question dans le sens inverse, je pense qu'il existe déjà effectivement des choses, de la coopération transfrontière qui fonctionne dans un certain nombre d'endroits, des systèmes de gestion multi-acteurs, de gouvernance institutionnelle qui fonctionnent. On a des exemples en France, on en a au Sénégal, j'en ai d'autres en tête, enfin, etc. Et que eux, ils font tous certaines villes, enfin bon, ou des réseaux de villes, ou des évolutions, voilà. Et incluant d'ailleurs le financement. Parce que ces systèmes de gouvernance peuvent être liés à des systèmes de financement ou de coopération décentralisée, enfin, etc. Donc, il y a des choses qui existent, hein, et il faut qu'elles soient présentes là, parce qu'il faut qu'elles arrivent à se bonifier, se faire voir et articuler le niveau mondial. Et pour en revenir aux engagements, ou pour finir sur les engagements et l'agenda de l'action, il faudrait pas, nous-mêmes on est hésitants à mettre nos engagements, il faudrait pas que ce soit une collection de choses, ou alors il faudrait qu'on arrive à les organiser, et on n'y arrivera pas s'il y a que des engagements, parce qu'ils ne résoudront pas les contradictions. Il faut un petit peu avancer les choses, mais comme disait Johannes au début, si c'est améliorer un système pour avoir des catastrophes environnementales, voilà, on a tout ça à résoudre et il faut le résoudre globalement. Et en réfléchissant, on se disait, avec les Français qui seront là, nos élus, etc., comment est-ce qu'on peut faire bouger le système? Et on se disait, des coalitions de champions multi-acteurs qui réunissent des États et d'autres coalitions sur la question globale. On avait des coalitions pour la gouvernance décentralisée de l'eau dans le cadre d'une vision globale des Nations Unies, avec des choses qui se passent. Peut-être que ça aussi, ça pourrait faire avancer les choses et nous faire penser global. Et pour terminer, du point de vue d'un État, qu'est-ce qu'on aimerait bien qu'il sorte en termes de point de départ, et je crois que c'est déjà sur la table, c'est que le système multilatéral, donc mettre l'eau au cœur, ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire pour nous une première étape qui pourrait être un envoyé spécial pour l'eau au passé auprès du secrétaire général des Nations Unies, et certainement pas auprès d'une organisation en particulier, mais bien pour essayer d'avoir cette vision globale. Après, comment faire pour en avoir une gouvernance, etc. C'est encore une question qui reste en suspens, mais pour nous, c'est remettre, voilà, parce qu'il va falloir résoudre les contradictions et parce que c'est le système multilatéral qui doit s'en préoccuper en grand. Et puis, des moments clés, effectivement, ne pas attendre 47 ans pour faire avancer les choses. Ça nous paraît, voilà, ça n'est pas encore, enfin, après on peut débattre sur la forme que ça doit prendre, mais la façon dont le système multilatéral doit se l'approprier sous la pression des États, parce que c'est les États, le système multilatéral, encore une fois, et comment arriver à faire bouger les choses, on voit un peu ça comme ça. Et pour répondre à une question qui m'a été posée dans le chat, que j'ai vu tout à l'heure, je crois que j'ai parlé des États parce que moi je représente un État, mais que le système unilatéral, il y a toute la place pour de l'inclusivité et il y a toute la place pour que les réseaux de villes s'intègrent par exemple, puisque nous sommes ici chez les villes, mais s'intègrent dans ce système multilatéral, proposent leur propre système de gouvernance. Et je dirais que en fait, les débats onusiens donnent aux villes de quoi discuter avec les États dans lesquels elles sont, de même que les débats onusiens donnent aux États de quoi discuter avec leur population pour construire une vision collective et une déclinaison spécifique. Donc je pense que ça c'est une vision à avoir aussi, c'est un intérêt, nous avons tous intérêt à ça et tous, chacun dans notre bulle. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.
Diana, tu y ajoutes quelque chose?
Quelque chose, enfin juste sur, enfin on l'a pas beaucoup mentionné, mais en 2010, l'eau a quand même été reconnue comme un droit de l'homme universel, par le terme en français, évidemment, moi qui parle plutôt l'anglais dans ma langue de travail. Et aussi que déjà bien avant ce moment-là, beaucoup de villes s'étaient mobilisées pour que l'eau, pour reconnaître l'eau comme bien universel. Il y a eu une charte lancée par beaucoup de villes, notamment même ici, même Genève, ça a été quelque chose qui a été débattu au Conseil et qui a accepté de s'engager. D'autres villes, d'ailleurs autour de Genève, en France, en Italie, etc. Et que ces questions sont évidemment extrêmement présentes pour les villes, et que dans ces chartes, il y avait aussi il y avait quelques éléments sur comment on peut s'engager sur un plan international et en lien avec d'autres acteurs.
Merci beaucoup. Actually, without preempting any decision at the conference, the idea Marie-Pierre mentioned of an envoyé spécial, special envoy, helping the PGA. I like the idea, and it gives me the idea to reformulate my closing question, which would be, if there will be a special envoy, what would you recommend after the water conference on the next day, as Natalie put it? When you wake up the next day after the conference, what would you recommend to this special envoy? Where to start the work, how to start the work, and with whom start the work? Let me reverse the order of the answers and start with Graham this time.
Well, I think that actually the first thing that the special envoy should do should go to the countries and see for themselves exactly the conditions on the ground of the most disadvantaged populations who we're trying to serve. Because that's work with other special envoys who worked in the housing sector and other areas, and countries need to be held accountable to these situations where the levels of coverage are very low, and there has to be a sort of ground truthing of those situations. So I would advocate for the special rapporteur to go on a visit of some of the most challenging countries to work out what the problems are in those situations and work out how we can address it. Because yes, of course, it is the biggest problem in most countries, access to water and sanitation. But I think that would be a good starting point.
Thank you. Also, it's an interesting question that once we will move to the implementation phase, if there will be any financing or extra sources for advancing the implementation. So let me add to this final question. What would you suggest, and do you see any possible source of extra financing of implementation? Marie-Pierre?
Pour l'envoyé spécial, je dirais que oui, qu'il aille se promener, mais qu'il se rende compte quand même que voilà, tout ça c'est pressé, qu'on a déjà fait beaucoup de choses, donc on espère qu'il s'y connaît un peu, voilà, et qu'on ne perd pas trop de temps il y a ne serait-ce que le rapport du rapporteur spécial sur le droit à l'eau et à l'assainissement pour les plus vulnérables, enfin voilà. Donc bien sûr, moi je le dirais, il faut d'abord qu'ils discutent avec les États dans leur ensemble pour avoir une vision globale de l'eau comme voilà, il doit être politique et il doit se penser comme ça et ensuite mettre en ordre le système multilatéral. Tout en effectivement se cultivant, si j'ose dire, et savoir sur le terrain qu'est-ce qui se passe. Donc ça c'est ça, voilà. Et après sur la question du financement, qui est toujours une sorte de chose de financement cumulatif, voilà. J'ai vu dans certains papiers qu'on imaginait un fonds spécial pour l'eau qu'on mettrait à côté des fonds déjà existants, etc. Voilà. Moi, je suis toujours réticente à ce genre de choses. Je pense que comment dirais-je, toujours pareil, la question de l'eau pensée en grand doit être une partie intégrante du financement du développement. Donc, il y a quand même une question d'orientation dans tous ces États et d'avoir une vision beaucoup plus comment dirais-je, intégrée et globale du financement du développement en intégrant la question de l'eau. et dans tous ses aspects, c'est-à-dire l'accès à tous de l'eau, le développement d'une agriculture qui soit comme ci, comme ça, le développement d'une industrie intégrant des systèmes d'alerte pour les inondations, etc. Donc là, je pense qu'il y a quelque chose à penser. Je pense aussi il existe beaucoup de choses en matière de coopération décentralisée, puisqu'on s'adresse aux villes, en matière notamment de ressources en eau et de construction des réseaux de ressources en eau, voilà, et qu'il y aurait lieu de se pencher sur comment tout cela est financé et comment ça marche, parce que il y a des choses qui marchent et que déjà mettre à plat un certain nombre de choses en matière de financement serait très utile pour savoir où on en est. Parce que moi, de mon point de vue, on n'y voit pas, enfin, on annonce des chiffres pharaoniques pour que tout le monde ait accès à l'eau et à l'assainissement. C'est sûr qu'il y a un besoin de financement, c'est sûr que, voilà. Après, selon quel modèle et comment et jusqu'à quel point ces chiffres, voilà, on a beaucoup à apprendre d'un certain nombre de systèmes d'eau et d'assainissement. On a beaucoup à apprendre d'innovations qui sont pas du tout technologiques et qui font vivre des systèmes qui fonctionnent. Donc, et encore une fois, l'eau, c'est un bien de proximité beaucoup. Et donc là, je pense qu'on n'a pas une vision claire et que faut toujours s'engager, hein, mais je pense pas que ce soit d'une très grande efficacité pour être sérieuse et que ça permette à tout le monde de se figurer ce qu'on va faire. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup et j'espère que la conférence va contribuer à avoir une vision plus claire de toute la complexité de cette question et des nécessités des fonds et de financement et de l'action.
Voilà.
Donc,
par quel bout prendre la chose, c'est
Diana, what would you recommend?
I think one of the important elements of the discussion was the inclusiveness. I think also involving all actors, as you mentioned, Johannes, this lack of inclusiveness. I was thinking about, we have here in Geneva the Human Rights Council. We have a special rapporteur on human rights and water, and he does a lot of consultations with all stakeholders, and which nourishes a lot his work. So it's definitively this needs to happen. The work with all the streams that do exist. And also, we didn't mention here indigenous knowledge, but it's very close to what Marie-Pierre just mentioned. And I'm just this morning we were hosting, we were welcoming some indigenous people from Northern Europe at the Environment House here in Geneva, and who were discussing how they are struggling with how the changes in cycle of water is affecting their lands. So definitely, this is also an important community, the indigenous communities around this world.
Thank you very much. Johannes.
There's so much to do actually, but I think you have included money in this question, or the finances. I don't think we are lacking finances. I think we have a wrong culture of dealing with investments. So I think if we need money to do stuff, that there's no question. But I think if we look at the budgets that we have today and what we're able to do in COVID response or in Ukraine war response or so, I don't think we have a real financing issue. I think it's a cultural issue that we have to overcome. And that's because water is separated at the national level, at the regional level, into different entities. Transboundary water issues are still a hot topic. So I think the special envoy needs to work on the culture of how we see water financing. And I think we should also address those big ticket items that will in the end decide also about cities or about sustainable development, which are, if Marie-Pierre rightly said, and you have alluded to it too, the hydrological cycle should be a global public good, because that's the stuff that connects everybody. Nobody is debating that oceans are global commons, but what about the water cycle? Why is the water cycle not a global common if the oceans are a global common? And we have a law about oceans, and maybe we need legal personalities for different compartments that are related to water. I don't know why does a river basin have no, there are some now, some rivers who have legal, but you need a hook, you need a legal hook to actually change our legislation and the policy and the enforcement of policies, because at the moment there is just no real possibility to advocate for these things. And then another big ticket item, I think, is the whole water and food and energy nexus. So if we are not able to decouple the production of calories from water consumption, we don't need climate change on top of war. We will just fail because of population growth and under our current system, where we are losing so much to where so much food goes to the waste. So, you know, those are some big ticket items that need to be urgently addressed. And I agree with the local level, and I know that individual situations are the tragedy of today, but I think that is probably mainly really the work of the special rapporteur on the human rights to water and sanitation. I think he would need to work very closely with a water envoy, and a water envoy really should bring those big ticket items to the forefront of political discussion, and needs to focus on a legal lever to actually do something about that.
Can I make a comment on the financing?
Yes, of course.
I mean, look, it doesn't cost much to provide water to people. To provide people with clean drinking water doesn't cost a lot of money, wherever you are in the world, providing there's an adequate source. So the problem is in providing that to the most disadvantaged populations, and how they pay for that. Currently, urban poor pay probably between 10 and 20 times in a city what the wealthy residents pay in the same city. So it can't be too difficult for cities and city administrations to work out the governance systems needed to charge the poor the same price for water in the city as the rich, providing the cost of production the same. So, you know, we have to there has to be some responsibility borne by the governments themselves to prioritise water and sanitation on their national agendas, on their national budgets, because that basic level of investment that's needed to provide the survival level of water and sanitation is within the means of all government. It's within the means of all government. So it's very important that we always get confused talking about ODA and money coming in from outside, but this is something that fundamentally needs to be prioritised by countries and governments, and it's within their cost. It's not extortionate. It's not like providing, you know, top-class healthcare, which does cost a lot of money. Basic water and sanitation doesn't cost a lot of money wherever you are, providing there's a resource.
Thank you very much. You mentioned prioritising water and sanitation at the national level. We heard from other speakers to prioritize water and sanitation and water governance on the international level. Given the mandate of Geneva Cities Hub, I may add that local and regional governments are the ones really facing this issue on the ground and serving their citizens and residents with these services. And our experience is that they have very good experiences. A lot of challenges, but also scalable best practices they can share, and they do share among each other. Hopefully they will have more and more opportunities to share it at the international level, at the multilateral level. So I would like to commend the organizers of the conference for this inclusive approach. And we are really happy and honored to have this great panel with us today, showing the different aspects of this question. I guess you will all be there in New York. I hope a lot of representatives of local and regional governments from the audience, in presence and online, will be also there in New York, and we wish you all a success for your work. You will hear from us because we will try to make sure that the voice and commitments of the local and regional governments are channeled in the most serious and most wide way possible. So once again, Marie-Pierre, Diana, Graham, Johannes, thank you very much, and best luck and good work for the water conference.
Merci.
Thank you.